What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And today we are talking top 10 Dynasty receivers. The NFL draft is behind us, so there's a lot to dissect. I'm here with my buddy, Nick Lepre. You can find him on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. Nick, the draft is behind us. I had an exciting weekend. I'm really happy we finally got these landing spots. How was your weekend? What did you make of the draft?
Yeah, the weekend was very fun. I love the NFL draft every single time, even though there was a lot of talk about how this draft was going to be boring because there's not too many quarterbacks in the first round, and then we get all these crazy trades. So I thought the first round was great. I thought the whole draft as a whole was very fun, and I am very excited for where we're sitting right now because all of that work that you do looking at all these college prospects now actually matters because they're all on actual teams. So very interested to discuss our wide receivers here today.
Yeah, me too. And before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsor. It is Underdog Fantasy. If you guys have never heard of Underdog, they have some phenomenal stuff going on. This past weekend, they just released their massive best ball tournament. There is $1 million up top for first place. It is $25 to enter. It's probably my favorite tournament of the entire year. So make sure to check that out. And better yet, before we dive into this, if you use the promo code Awesemo, you can get a match deposit bonus up to $100. And by my math, that's a couple entries into the Best Ball Mania. So make sure to check out Underdog today. They're doing some special stuff over there. All right, Nick, you ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So my number one dynasty receiver, and I think this is probably largely the consensus around the industry, is still Drake London. So he was the first receiver off the board. I was very happy about that. I had some bets on Drake London, plus money to become the first wide receiver drafted. But as a prospect, he comes out of USC, 3-year player there, also was on their basketball team before he decided to fully commit to football. Good size, no athletic testing because of the fractured ankle. But ultimately, this guy really checks every single box outside of the missing athletic numbers. What did you make of the landing spot with Drake London? And is he your number one dynasty receiver?
Yeah, for me, he is also my number one dynasty wide receiver. Now, obviously, the landing spot, it's a little wishy washy here, right? You got Marcus Mariota as the starting quarterback. They did draft Desmond Ritter, so things could potentially get better for him. But in terms of year one production, I think if you were just ranking for year one, which we're not, we're just talking about dynasty as a whole, I think Drake London should be the clear wide receiver one in both spots. Without them having Calvin Ridley this year, I think Drake London is going to be peppered with targets. Obviously, they have Kyle Pitts as well, but this is a team that I think is looking to get a lot better. Is Desmond Ritter the quarterback of the future? Is Mariota the quarterback of the future? Probably not. But even with some subpar quarterback play, I think Drake London will be able to get it done. He did so well last year playing in just 8 games, having over 1,000 yards, 88 receptions, 24.8% target share, 7 touchdowns at USC. I'm very excited about Drake London here in Atlanta. And like you said, I think he is the clear consensus number one guy. I don't think I've seen any rankings where someone didn't have Drake London as their number one rookie receiver.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear cut to me. And we see wide receivers produce with subpar quarterback play. And I mean, there's also some positives here. If Mariota and Desmond Ritter both get their shot, and if they're both bad, that means Atlanta's probably going to be drafting near the top of next year's class. And there's some phenomenal quarterback prospects that are potentially going to be there. So it could be as recent as or as near as year two, where this is a much better situation to target. Even if Ridley returns next year, I don't really see that affecting the career of London too much. I mean, again, he's not even 21 years old, so just ridiculous numbers here. And I isolated his target share on games where he actually played every snap, 37% target share in those games where he was not injured. So just unbelievable usage when you go into the weeds with Drake London. But we're in consensus here. Wide receiver two in Dynasty, I think, is where things get shaken up a little bit. So my question to you before we reveal it, who is your Dynasty wide receiver two?
Right now at number two, I have Garrett Wilson, but I think, like you said, it is pretty close. I mean, I think there is the clear number one with Drake London. And then after that, there's going to be maybe three, four guys that you can probably make the argument to be the number two.
Yeah, I had Treylon Burks too. I have Garrett Wilson three, just revealed to you guys. Let's talk about Burks first, and then we'll dive
Mhm.
into Garrett Wilson. These are two and three for us both, I imagine, or something close to it. But with Burks, he's a polarizing prospect. I've seen him as high as Dynasty wide receiver one on a few boards. And prior to the draft class, I think some other people had him receiver number one in the class. We know that the trade that the Titans orchestrated with AJ Brown I don't know what you think of that, but they, I guess, get his replacement here with Burks, who's 6'2", 225, plays a lot like AJ Brown downfield. Ran the 4.55 40-yard dash. I think some of the GPS testing numbers we have on Burks kind of squash those speed concerns. He was well over 20 miles an hour on numerous occasions this year. So I think some of that information was a little more useful to NFL teams than just the 40 time he put on the display at the combine. But overall, it's a guy that won a lot in the slot. He had a 68% slot rate. He won a lot underneath, but a lot of people will use that as a knock against him. He played for an Arkansas team with a lot of limitations, and they have a good OC in Kendall Briles. And we see this a lot in the NFL, where teams just put their best playmaker in the slot. They find the easiest ways to get them the ball, and then they just let them produce after the catch. That's a lot of what Burks did. So before we downgrade him for his role with Arkansas, I just want to highlight that. What do you make of the landing spot with Burks here? I know it's a run heavy offense, but I mean, target should be there for him.
Yeah, the only issue with this is that this is a run heavy offense. But besides that, this is a situation where it seems pretty clear that coming out of college that this guy is going to be the number one wide receiver on the team. Now I understand that they also have Robert Woods, and I am much of a Robert Woods fanboy. I do still think Robert Woods has some gas left in the tank. He's not some schlub like we saw with Julio Jones last year in Tennessee, but I do really believe that Treylon Burks is in a situation where his target share is going to be immense in this offense. And that if they are down in these games, that they're going to have to be feeding the ball to Treylon Burks. I do still really believe that Tannehill will be the guy the whole year. I understand there's all of this talk right now that, oh, Tannehill doesn't want to mentor Malik Willis. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter at all in the scheme of things when we're talking about this from a fantasy football, DFS standpoint, anything like that. So I think Burks here, as the number one receiver in Tennessee, should be seeing a lot of targets. My only worry is that maybe the Titans are just as good as last year and they're running the ball a lot later on in the game, which just wouldn't be as good in terms of getting Burks to maybe get some crazy 10 targets a game.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, with the speed in the current 40-yard dash he has, that's still 87th percentile for his weights. It's not like the 4.55 is slow by any means for a guy who weighs 225 pounds. My concerns are the same as yours. I think the Tannehill concerns are a little overblown.
Mhm.
People will say he took a step back. I mean, do you see the receiver he was playing with at the end of last year? Julio Jones and AJ Brown hurt. I don't know what you think about Nick Westbrook, Akine, but in my opinion, he's not even close to the same caliber as those players. But I think you could have Burks anywhere from dynasty wide receiver 2 to 4, and we'll be okay with it. So let's move on to your dynasty receiver number 2. My number 3, it's Garrett Wilson, and he comes off the board to the Jets. I think a lot of people viewed him as the number one receiver in this class. There's not much to dislike about him. He's 6 feet, 183 pounds, ran a sub 4.4 40-yard dash, 36-inch vert, so plenty athletic. And he produced at every possible turn with Ohio State. Over 1,000 yards this year, 723 in the COVID shortened season he played in 2020. And he was doing it mostly on the perimeter. He had just a 17% slot rate. And this guy was doing it with other first round draft picks in his offense. So all that I think bodes extremely well for Garrett Wilson. Tell me what you think about the landing spot here with New York.
Yeah, with the Jets are probably one of the most interesting teams looking forward because if Zach Wilson is the guy, if Robert Sala is the head coach of the future, then this could be a very dangerous landing spot for Garrett Wilson where he could really just elevate himself to potential superstardom. Now, they do have Elijah Moore there. They swung and missed with Denzel Mims a couple of years ago. At least that's what the perception is right now, is that Mims was not a hit. But I think here that Garrett Wilson could be the 1B to Elijah Moore's 1A, or maybe even the 1A to Elijah Moore's 1B. I don't think this year the Jets are going to take this crazy leap to be this team that wins 6, 7 games. And I understand most teams winning 6, 7 games that's a bad season, right? But based upon what we've seen from the Jets over the last what feels like a decade, that would be fantastic for the Jets. So I think that even if they aren't this fantastic team, that you can still get a lot of fantasy value from these players. And I think that Garrett Wilson will be able to put up a solid year in 2022. Is that going to be a top 12 wide receiver year? Probably not, right? But I do think maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when the Jets, what they are building actually comes to fruition, when it starts looking really good, then I think that Garrett Wilson will be fantastic. So again, he is my wide receiver 2 compared to your wide receiver 3, but it really isn't this humongous difference in my book. So I like the landing spot for the Jets, and I do think that they will continue to get a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're splitting hairs here. I almost had Wilson as the wide receiver 2 in this class post draft, and I can see a lot of reasons why you would. I think a lot of people overblow the quarterback situations, especially year one. One thing I'll
Mhm.
say about the Jets is they're going to know if Zach Wilson has it or not, assuming they're
Yes.
fully healthy this year. They're going to know. I think the worst case scenario for Garrett Wilson would be the Jets hang on to an underperforming Zach Wilson in years 3 and 4 just because of their sunk cost, former second overall pick. What you'd really like to see is either Zach Wilson produce, be the guy they thought he was, or move on from him quickly if he fails this year with all this elite players around him. So that's kind of how I view Garrett Wilson. I think there's a lot of upside in the current situation here with New York. Let's go to my dynasty receiver 4, and I want you to tell me where you have this player as well. I actually moved this last night. We talked, and I had this player 5, but I just moved him up to 4, and it's Jameson Williams. A lot of the overall profile is clouded by the ACL, but I think we can assume that he would have been at least among the fastest receivers in this class. There were reports that he potentially could have broken the 40-yard dash record. He's 6'2, 179, played for Alabama, formerly Ohio State. Again, that Ohio State offense is 3 first rounders. So he transfers out in order to get full playing time. And that's not a concern for me because he went to Alabama. He didn't go to like SMU or some G5 program, and he puts up 79 receptions, 1,527 yards, and 15 scores, only a 28% slot rate. So he's winning on the outside. He lands with Detroit. And what do you think of this Detroit offense, man? I think outside of Jared Goff, this is one of the better skill position groups in the NFL. What do you think of the landing spot?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, Jared Goff is not very exciting, but he's also not as bad as a lot of people give him credit for.
Went to a Super Bowl.
I'm not saying he's like some top 12 quarterback in the NFL or something, but he's not that bad. So with DeAndre Swift, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with TJ Hawkinson, with Jameson Williams, this is going to be an offense kind of maybe similar to the Jets where, wow, look at that. They look pretty good, but this team has like 4 wins. That's probably what we're going to end up seeing. Dan Campbell is a very interesting head coach. He doesn't seem like he's much of an X's and O's guy, but he seems more like one of those guys that is just a little bit crazy, like the Kool-Aid man. He fires the team up and then they just play well. So I think Jameson Williams is in a very interesting spot. I'm very interested to see where the targets go in this offense if Jameson Williams becomes the clear alpha guy in this offense, or if it is kind of like with how I see the Jets being maybe a 1A, 1B scenario with Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, because we saw at the end of last season, Amon-Ra St. Brown was getting 10, 11, 12, 13 targets a game, which is just ridiculous to expect in 2022, but maybe him and Goff just have this great connection. So I like this landing spot for Jameson Williams. A lot of people thought he was the best wide receiver in this class. They thought that he could be the first wide receiver drafted in this class. So I think the Detroit Lions were very happy with this pick. He's only 21 years old, as if any of these guys are super old besides the guy that the Bears drafted. So, and we're not even going to talk about him. But yeah, Jameson Williams, I like this landing spot. And I do think that the Lions offense is going to produce pretty solid for him as long as Goff isn't just awful.
Yeah, you had to take the shot at my Bears there. Velus Jones, man, not it. He's definitely not on this list we're talking about today. But there's a couple things to round out with Jameson Williams. Again, similar to the other quarterbacks on this list, it's not the best play, but if Goff is bad, they're just gonna be picking top 5 again, and they'll move on from him. He doesn't appear to be their quarterback of the future, but they have so much money tied up in him right now; it's hard to move on. This guy that also played a lot of special teams. So, I mean, he does give you some versatility in terms of punt returns, kick returns there. But overall, the one concern I have with Jared Goff at quarterback is that's not a guy that generally pushes the ball downfield. And we saw that with Amon-Ra St. Brown's ridiculous 30% target share last year. Again, like they didn't have any receivers. TJ Hawkinson was hurt. So does Amon-Ra get a 30% target share again? In my opinion, that's highly unlikely. But could this be an Amon-Ra 20-25% target share and then Jameson Williams in that same range? Yeah, I think so. And is this offense good enough to sustain them both? I think there will be ups and downs, at least early in Jameson Williams' career. But overall, I think he's a phenomenal prospect moving forward. My wide receiver 5, I had him at 4 last night, but I just think the Jameson Williams profile is so much better for long-term upside. The guy I had ahead of him was Chris Olave, now my wide receiver 5 in Dynasty. With Olave, there's a lot to like. He's similar to his teammate Garrett Wilson in terms of his size and speed. He's 6 feet, 187, 4.39, 40-yard dash, so almost identical there. He's almost the same age as well. I believe Olave is just a few days older than Garrett Wilson. But he's a player that also produced at least in 3 seasons with Ohio State. He's a 4-year player there, was doing it mostly on the boundary. His slot rate was 18.5%. He's known as the best route runner in this class. And the one concern I have with him is just yards left on the field. This is a guy that was at 2.29 yards per route run. That was 31st in this class. So this is not a guy who's doing a lot on his own. He's getting the yards that are either thrown to him, he's not breaking tackles. So my question with Olave is, can he actually be a wide receiver one in this league? Myself and I think a lot of other people, including teams, view him as a high upside wide receiver too. But apparently the Saints, man, with the draft capital they gave up to get him, he should be their wide receiver one based on that. How do you think he fits in with this scheme?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting spot for him. And this is just a very interesting team as a whole compared to or just with the fact that Michael Thomas has been just absent for the last 2 years. Like it seems like he's going to come back. And then it's like, oh, he'll be back by week 6. Week 6 comes. Oh, it'll be week 10. And then they say that he's shutting it all down. I don't know what to think about Michael Thomas. I'm not saying he's as crazy as Antonio Brown, but it almost seems like he is one of those type of guys you just have no idea what's going to happen. I think that if Michael Thomas is back and fully healthy for at least the next couple of years, that is going to impact Chris Olave potentially becoming the number one wide receiver in this offense. I do not think Jameis Winston will be the guy for the future. I think if we're looking back at this video, say in 2024, this Saints roster is going to be widely different than it is right now. But based upon what they have right now, I think Jameis Winston is a pretty interesting quarterback. Again, I don't think he's the guy for the future, but he does make some plays that you're like, wow, this guy's actually good. And then obviously 5 seconds later, he makes a play where you're confused why he's even in the NFL. But at the end of the day, I think that Chris Olave is a pretty talented player. And I just think here that if you don't have him ranked inside the top 5, that's a little bit crazy. But I see why you have him at 5. I originally had him at 4, ahead of Jameson Williams.
Yeah, I literally changed that last night, but I'll tell you my concerns quick, and I want to hear your thoughts on them. One, it's just the college profile is not on the same caliber as the top four receivers. He just didn't produce at the same level, and that's evidenced by his yards per route run. The other players are squarely in the top 10, and this guy's outside the top 30. He lands with New Orleans. You mentioned Michael Thomas, assuming health, and we'll assume that for this discussion. I think he's still the wide receiver one there, which would make Chris Olave the wide receiver two. And then the Saints were the run heaviest offense in neutral game scripts when Jameis Winston was under center last year. So it's a team that I think wants to run the ball. They also took an offensive lineman in the first round. So I think that's further evidence they want to run the ball. And I mean, like their receivers were Marquez Callaway and Lil Jordan Humphrey last year. This is certainly an upgrade on that. But those are concerns for me. Are they for you as well?
Yeah, no, those are definitely some concerns, but like you said, they didn't really have those wide receivers. I mean, everyone and their mother talked up Traquan Smith last offseason, and we saw how well that went. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere. It was like a train that just crashed instantly. So I think that with this offense now, I maybe they will be pretty run heavy because Alvin Kamara is obviously super talented, but I still believe that they will be looking at a higher octane passing attack. They just have to, I would think if Michael Thomas is back again, like you said, we have to assume Michael Thomas will be back because all signs are pointing towards him being back.
Yeah, usually you see these things regress, at least the teams that are on the fringes of either pass rate or run rate. Like the Ravens, they were really run heavy and they moved towards the middle of the pack last year. So the Saints could
Yeah.
very well do that. And it could just be game script. Let's move to wide receiver 6 in the rankings. I didn't want to do this, but the draft capital just forced me to. It's Jahan Dotson, first round pick to the Washington Commanders. I like talking about Dotson in conjunction with Skyy Moore because Jahan Dotson was less productive. He's smaller and he's less athletic, but he played at Penn State and Skyy Moore played at Western Michigan. So the level of competition can't be discounted here. Overall, he's somewhat athletic for his size. I think people see the 4.43 40-yard dash and their minds are blown. And then they don't consider this guy is only 178 pounds. If he wasn't running a 4.43, that would be a major concern for me. He was highly productive in college, 2 phenomenal seasons, over 1,000 yards last year. He would have been over 1,000 yards in 2020 had the Big Ten actually played a full season. He's under a very heavy pass scheme with Penn State and Mike Yurcich as the OC. So, I mean, some of these numbers are a little inflated. I mean, if you play for these heavy air raid schemes, you're naturally going to have higher numbers. For reference, he only had a 31% target share. And we saw with Drake London, he was up at 37%. So there are some concerns here. He did win outside, and I don't know if he'll be asked to do that with Washington. We know they have Terry McLaurin, but because of Dotson's size, I think he's probably best in the slot. But again, I'm not sure. He won outside in college. What do you think of the fit here with Washington?
This is a very interesting spot for me because I did not think Dotson, even in the slightest, would have been picked as highly as he was inside of the first round. I'm not saying that he's not a first round caliber wide receiver. I just didn't think he would go that high. And I think here with Washington, my biggest concern has to be the quarterback situation. I do not trust Carson Wentz worth anything. There are some Carson Wentz apologists out there that'll give you a laundry list of excuses about why he hasn't been able to do it recently. I just don't think he's very good. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think the Washington football team is locked into him, but the quarterback situation in Washington has been a disaster for the last couple of years. And I don't know if they're going to be able to iron that out over the next couple of years because recently it's just shown us that, hey, they really have no idea what they're doing at the quarterback position. Behind Terry McLaurin, this is a pretty solid spot for him to be. The NFC East is relatively open. They're going to be playing a bunch of games in the NFC East, obviously, because that's just how football works. So I think that this could be a pretty interesting spot for him. Overall, though, I'm just not sold on him being ahead of Sky Moore. Like you talked about, I know it is definitely pretty close in your head as well, but I just don't love the Washington Commanders football team, whatever their name is now.
I 100% had Sky Moore ahead of Dotson in the pre-draft process. It's just the difference in draft capital where
Mhm.
at that point it's really hard for me to ignore. Like Dotson, well in the first round, and Sky Moore goes in the 50s. I mean, everything
Mhm.
points to Sky Moore being the better prospect outside of playing at Western Michigan versus Penn State. But man, the draft capital is hard to ignore. I don't think he's the wide receiver one in Washington, which is a concern here. Yards per route run, this guy was 20th in the class. Again, when you compare him to the top five receivers, the big four at the top were in the top 10, and then Chris Olave was 31st. Dotson's 20th, so that's a little bit better than Olave, which, I mean, take that for what it's worth. Just a tough projection and a tough landing spot overall, in my opinion. But let's go to Dynasty wide receiver 7. It sounds like you're as high as this player as I am. It's Sky Moore. He comes off the board after some guys we're going to talk about later. But again, I think this guy was underdrafted based on the physical profile. He's built kind of like Golden Tate, but he's faster than Jahan Dotson. He's 20 pounds on Dotson, but he's faster, which is incredible to me. Better athlete, better production. This guy had nearly 2,500 yards receiving, just over 2,500 yards receiving in 3 years. And again, Western Michigan played a COVID shortened season in 2020. So this guy, I think, would have been a double 1,000 yard producer had he actually played a full season. And he was doing it against really good competition. Whenever they stepped up, he produced. Against Pittsburgh, the guy had 11 catches and 124 yards in this score. So it wasn't just that he was able to do this against MAC competition. When they stepped up in non-con, he did it as well. How do you think he fits with the Kansas City Chiefs, who we know lost Tyreek Hill and need to find some replacements there?
Yeah, so there's a team now without Tyreek Hill, like you said, he's on my Dolphins now, and now they have Juju Smith-Schuster, they have MVS. None of these names are very exciting. Now, Juju a couple of years ago, people were thinking this guy is the next Antonio Brown potentially, right? He is the heir to the throne in Pittsburgh. And then obviously that experiment kind of dwindles down. I think Juju's still a talented player. And in terms of if you're doing just a normal fantasy football draft, I'm fine spending my 110th pick on Juju Smith Schuster. But am I very excited to do it? No. I think that Sky Moore, who had a 38% target share, 36.68 target share last year in college at Western Michigan. This is just a very interesting player. I do not believe that he's going to be the number one target on the team. I honestly think that will be Travis Kelsey. I think they're going to look to run the ball a little bit more. And I do, though, believe 100% that Patrick Mahomes is going to be very successful without Tyreek Hill. There's a lot of people talking about how he's just going to regress without Tyreek Hill. I think you'd have to be kind of not really watching the games if you really think that in my book. So I think Sky Moore's in a really good position to succeed. I just would not say that he's locked and loaded to be the number one wide receiver there. And I don't know how many targets the number one wide receiver is going to get there because I think that Travis Kelsey is just going to be eating up a very high amount of targets, at least in 2022. But I do think maybe a year or two from now, Sky Moore should be the number one guy based upon, again, he should have been a first round pick in my book, but I think he will end up being the guy.
Yeah, I bet all his unders and lost those in the NFL draft, but he was fifth in yards per route run in the country. That's phenomenal. We'd love to see him check that box. With the fit in Kansas City, MVS, he didn't produce with Aaron Rodgers. What's to say he's going to produce with Patrick Mahomes? I think that's pretty similar level of talent at the quarterback position. So that's a little damning for him. You have guys like Miko Hardman who have never produced when given the opportunity. You have Juju Smith-Schuster on a steady decline. So there's at least a chance that Sky Moore is the wide receiver one in the offense. He'll be behind Kelsey for the foreseeable future. But when we talk dynasty, Kelsey's in his 30s. He's not going to play forever. So even that could be a potential feather in the cap of Sky Moore. I love him here. At Dynasty wide receiver 8, I had to do it finally. It's Christian Watson, pick 34 to the Green Bay Packers. The Packers trade up in, oh my goodness, that trade. They trade 30, or excuse me, they trade 53 and 59 to move up and take a receiver that might have been there at 53. Like, Green Bay, get it together. But Watson, he lands in a wide open situation. This is similar to the Chiefs, where the Packers lose Devontae Adams. They lose a ton of targets, and they don't have any readily available players to potentially take up those targets. Watson's 6'4", 208, unbelievably athletic, but that's about as much as we can say. The guy never had 43 catches, or never had more than 43 catches or 800 yards with his college program, which was an FCS school. He played at North Dakota State. He's an older prospect as well, 23 years old. He played 5 seasons in college. I don't know. There's a lot of concerns here, but I mean, I have to put him in the top 10 because he lands with Green Bay with elite draft capital. What do you make of this puzzle?
Yeah, I think that Green Bay traded up probably because Rodgers had the ownership, the GM at gunpoint or something, because they weren't picking a wide receiver for some reason. And then they get Christian Watson. I don't think that Christian Watson is Devontae Adams, but does he need to be Devontae Adams to succeed with a guy like Aaron Rodgers? In my opinion, no. We just discussed MVS. He was not successful in the slightest with the Green Bay Packers. The Packers still have Lazard. They have some other options to throw the ball to. And I think if we're just talking about dynasty as a whole, I think people this season are heavily sleeping on Aaron Jones because I think Rodgers might just dump the ball off 7 zillion times because, the wide receiver core there in Green Bay just isn't as good as you would want it to be. I think, like you said, though, it would almost be foolish to rank Christian Watson outside of the top 10 strictly because of where he landed. And my belief is that Rodgers will probably be there for another year or two, unless maybe he just says, I'm done after the season, right? He's tired of this and he just retires, which is definitely possible for Aaron Rodgers. He does have the insurance to do it. He'll be just fine. So I like Christian Watson here in Green Bay. The only concern is, will he be able to do it from NDSU to the NFL level? And will Rodgers actually pepper this guy with targets like people are going to project him to? Or is Rodgers just going to spread it all around, share the wealth with everyone? And then at the end of the season, you're like, damn, why did I draft Christian Watson? And then maybe he's just stuck in this situation with Jordan Love for the future. And Jordan Love doesn't look great either.
All right, I have a hypothetical for you, and I want you to tell me how likely you think this is. So Christian Watson, we know he's coming from North Dakota State, a large jump to the NFL.
Yeah.
What are the chances Green Bay opens the season with Randall Cobb in the slot, Sammy Watkins, and Alan Lazard on the perimeter, and Watson's a rotational player? What are the chances that happens?
I think there's a pretty good chance that happens. Sammy Watkins is the king of the first couple of weeks of the season, and then he just flies out of there, So it is entirely possible that
played over
Watkins
Rashad Bateman last year for a majority of the season.
Yeah, no, it is entirely possible. I mean, he's much older. He's done it at the NFL level. Now, he's never done anything fantastic, but he's there. He's always there in the NFL, There's
Yeah.
So I think there's honestly, I'd say there's probably like a 75% chance that the scenario that you just outlined is true. For some reason, Randall Cobb is also just stuck there in Green Bay.
And look, man, they drafted his backup in the 3rd round last year in Amari Rodgers, who maybe even is a better prospect than Watson. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a very volatile situation. I could see Watson being anywhere from the wide receiver 1,000-yard producer to being the wide receiver 4. So just know that going in. But let's go to wide receiver 9. It is Wandel Robinson, another guy who I did not rank highly in pre-draft. But, man, the draft capital is just so high on this guy. When these guys get early second-round draft capital, it suggests they're at least going to get some opportunity to produce. Wandale Small, this is a guy that started his career at Nebraska. Their coach, Scott Frost, kind of did the Deebo Samuel treatment where he played running back half the time, started games at running back on occasion, and then didn't maximize his potential as a receiver. So he transfers to Kentucky. He has the phenomenal season last year, over 100 catches, 1,300 yards, 7 scores, top 5 in yards per route run. It's just that this guy's 5'8", 178, and ran a 4.44, so he's not even crazy athletic for his size. Not to mention, New York seems pretty deep at wide receiver. This team drafted maybe a Wandale Robinson clone in Kadarius Toney last year. What do you see him doing in this offense?
This is probably one of the most confusing offenses in the NFL right now. I don't think that Daniel Jones is the guy. The team doesn't think he's the guy because they didn't accept his 5th-year option.
I think that's good.
No, that probably is good for Wandale Robinson. I'm just saying in terms of this season, they definitely don't want Daniel Jones going forward. This is a team that they paid Kenny Golladay the big bucks. Him and Kadarius Toney combined for 0 total touchdowns last year, which just isn't good when you have all that money, all that draft capital invested into these wide receivers. Kadarius Toney, there's a lot of talk earlier on a couple weeks ago that this guy is done. He hates the Giants. And then he goes on Instagram. He's like, don't believe everything you see on the internet. So who knows if he even actually wanted to leave or what is happening. The Giants seems like they're going to lose Bradbury. That has zero impact on their offense, obviously. But it seems like the Giants just have no idea what to do with these players. Like their players are getting angry at them. I think Wandel Robinson could become the number one guy there, but with how much money, or maybe the number two guy, but with how much money they have invested in Galladay, I don't think that's very likely, at least on the Sooner standpoint. So I get why I haven't ranked at wide receiver 9. I don't even think I'd have him ranked inside the top 10. But obviously, when they have the high draft capital, that does kind of impact where you got to rank him.
Yeah, just for clarity, I did not have him in the top 10 pre-draft, but just high second round draft capital, it's really hard
Uh-huh.
not to. So with Wandale, you guys mentioned it. There's Galladay, there's Sterling Shepard. He's coming off an Achilles, so we'll talk about that. And there's Kadarius Toney, all who could be ahead of him. With that said, Kadarius Toney actually operated outside more than I thought last year. So there's a chance that Wandale plays in the slot. They move Toney outside full time. And then Sterling Shepard, again, he's coming off an Achilles. And just this is a new regime. So Brian Daboll comes over from Buffalo. He has no ties to Galladay, Kadarius Toney, or Sterling Shepard. And Brian Daboll coming over from Buffalo, this team with the Bills last year, they're running 4 wide, way above league average, and they throw the piss out of the ball. So there's a chance that you just have Wandale and maybe even a Sterling Shepard operating in the slot in conjunction with each other when they do go 4 wide. So there's a lot of avenues to Wandale Robinson's success. Again, you don't need to draft him really high just because he's clearly behind, I think, the top guys we mentioned already. But man, second round draft capital, it's hard to ignore Wandale Robinson at this point. But let's move to our wide receiver 10. It's Alec Pierce. Love the landing spot with Indianapolis. There's a lot of opportunity available to him. Does he usurp Michael Pittman as the wide receiver 1? Probably not, but this is a team that has a lot of targets available. They had a huge upgrade at quarterback this offseason. Pierce didn't even play wide receiver till he was already in college with Cincinnati. This is a guy that actually started his career at linebacker there. So he is a player that kind of came on the scene late, but in his final year, 52 receptions, 884 yards, 8 scores, and he's 6'3", 211 with a 4.4 140-yard dash. This guy is almost 40 pounds heavier than Wandale Robinson, and he's faster. It's just incredible size, speed adjustment. And normally I'm concerned when these guys don't have elite production like Christian Watson. But with Pierce, we do have the late career position change, so there is some growth we can project to his career arc. What do you think of Alec Pierce with Indianapolis?
Yeah, I completely agree with your standpoint on that. I don't think he's going to be able to get over Michael Pittman as the number one receiver on this team. I think we've seen enough out of Michael Pittman at the NFL level to believe that he is the number one guy on this team. I do agree with you that Matt Ryan is a humongous upgrade over that garbage can Carson Wentz. I saw that Reggie Wayne the other day, who is the wide receiver coach now, I believe, of the Indianapolis Colts, said that he sees Peyton Manning in Matt Ryan and that made him cry. I don't know what he was looking at to see that. Again, I don't think Matt Ryan is bad or something, but comparing Matt Ryan to Peyton Manning, that's just a little bit crazy in my book. That's like saying Carson Wentz is like Tom Brady or something like that. It just doesn't make very much sense. But again, Matt Ryan is definitely a humongous step up over Carson Wentz. And I think Alex Pierce could easily become the number 2 guy there, right? They have had a mismatch of wide receiver 2s there. I believe T.Y. Hilton is still on the team. That guy is just about as washed up as it gets. So there should really be no concern with Pierce getting a high amount of targets in this offense as the number 2 guy. This is a team that does like to run the ball, obviously. I'd love to run the ball too if I had Jonathan Taylor as my running back, the guy who just bulldozes past everyone, can catch a bunch of passes. So this is a very solid landing spot. They did pay a relatively high draft capital for him. Draft capital does mean a lot more than most people will think, like you were talking about with Wandel Robinson. Like you said, you don't really think he's the greatest player, should be a top 10 guy, but he gets drafted highly. You have to keep in mind that these guys are paying these high prices, these GMs, the owners, the coaches, they're paying this high price for this guy. They're going to want to use him. Again, he's not a first round pick, so he's not locked and loaded that way, but I do think that for the Indianapolis Colts, I like Alex Pierce.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about draft capital when we do the best of the rest. Just touch on a few guys after this. But last thing with Alec Pierce, I think he really does fit what the team needed at wide receiver 2. You mentioned T.Y. Hilton on the outs. These receivers that are field stretchers are getting paid ridiculous money. We saw it with the MVS contract. we have Alec Pierce running a 4.4 140 yard dash at 6'3, even if he's not the second round player that he's drafted to be. A player like MVS getting that size deal on the secondary market's ridiculous. So there's at least value in Alec Pierce playing that role, not to mention the development he could potentially have. So I like him. I think he'll have situational success with the Colts, spike weeks, if you will. But ultimately, that still keeps him as the dynasty wide receiver 10. We are through the top 10 now, and I just want to give some shine to a couple players with kind of the best of the rest segment. I think there's a strong, at least, argument for some of these players being in the top 10, but just to rattle off a few, and then I'll give you the floor to talk about really whoever you want. We had George Pickens go to Pittsburgh. Pretty good draft capital there. He did fall a little bit because of some off-field concerns, injuries with him. I think he's in contention. David Bell went very late, but he enters just a wide open depth chart with Cleveland. You had John Mechie going to Houston. They have Brandon Cooks there, the ACL with Mechie, but should be looking at opportunities sooner rather than later. We had Tyquan Thornton, who maybe exemplifies the high draft capital, weak prospect more than anyone else, lands in New England. He has that game-breaking speed, but he actually produced at a below average mark when you look at yards per route run. Not in terms of NFL prospects. He was below average for college players in yards per route run. So, man, tough to see him. Danny Gray to Dallas, Romeo Doubs to Green Bay, Velus Jones to Chicago. The floor is yours. Talk about whoever you see as the top players in this best of the rest group.
Yeah, so my top three out of that group would be Pickens, Bell, and Mechie. I think you can almost, crazy enough, rank Mechie first, despite the fact that he is not going to see, at least based upon what I've read, he's not going to be ready for early on in the season. So we might not see too much out of him in year one. And how much would we even see of him in Houston? Like, how excited are you with Davis Mills for the first year of John Mechie? Probably not very high, right? I don't think Davis Mills is bad, but he's not very exciting in terms of a year one prospect, but 2-3 years down the line, I think he's going to be very interesting. George Pickens, I don't know if you saw the video of him getting drafted, but he's just standing in front of the TV. The Steelers pick him and he's just shaking his head, like looking like he looks like he fits in the AFC North, just like a crazy guy, just based upon how he was
Dude,
looking there.
he's a monster blocker. That dude is a mean.
Yeah, he looks like he'd lay out Von Bell. So, he looks like he'd fit pretty well there in Pittsburgh. So I like that landing spot. And again, Juju was on the out. Chase Claypool, to me, seems pretty iffy. I mean, I assume you like Chase Claypool, but I
I'm a
think
Notre Dame fan, but I mean, Chase Claypool, I think he's been up and down, to put it positively.
yeah, that what, I'll agree with that. He's been up and down. He has shown some talent. Deontay Johnson looks like the clear number one guy there, but Pickens will see a pretty solid role there. And I think that Kenny Pickett will be the guy there. And maybe Pickett just likes Pickens a lot more since their names start similarly. And then David Bell of the Cleveland Browns. The Browns wide receiver core is just decimated right now. Jarvis Landry might come back, but I don't know why he'd come back after just deciding not to sign there. So my best bet is that he would be gone. They've got Donovan Peoples-Jones. They have Anthony Schwartz. They don't have this great wide receiver core. So David Bell might just slot in as the number one guy there, which I guess would make you the most interested in him, but I'm just not too sure he fits the mold of a guy that 2-3 years from now is the guy there, the number one guy. So what do you think about Bell real quick?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think with Bell, I mean, outside of Amari Cooper, he just flat out might be their wide receiver too. Like, there's a chance, I wouldn't say it's likely, there's a chance that David Bell outproduces a guy like Christian Watson in year one just because of opportunity. The Browns just don't have any proven playmakers outside of Amari Cooper. And maybe they just run 12 personnel, two tight ends every single set. They very well could decide to do that with Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. But I also agree with you on Pickens and Mechie. With Pickens, I think for dynasty purposes, you have upcoming free agent Deontay Johnson hitting the market. So maybe he's an available replacement and a better player in the future than currently. But overall, those were my top three outside of the top 10 we mentioned. There's a couple others I just want to mention. Tyquan Thornton is that Wandale Robinson type player for the Patriots. He got incredible draft capital. He was drafted ahead of guys like Skyy Moore, which I just flat out did not see coming. He came out of Baylor. He's this tall, wiry, but he ran a 4.28 40-yard dash. So I think New England's looking for some speed injected into their offense. Kendrick Bourne doesn't have it. Jacoby Myers doesn't have it. Nelson Aguilar did have it at least early in his career. He's getting up there in age, and he's never been the producer they expect. So maybe Tyquan Thornton's this player that's more valuable for real life just with his field stretching ability than fantasy, but he's there. And last guy I want to mention, Romeo Doubs, the only guy on day 3 on this list for me. he was more productive than Christian Watson at a better school in Nevada. I think there's a chance that we'll have to monitor this in the preseason, but Romeo Doubs just might be a better player than Christian Watson. That's a stretch to say, but I mean, how far fetched is that? I want to get your opinion on Romeo Doubs.
No, I don't think that's all that hot of a take, right? Again, Christian Watson is not the second coming of like some elite wide receiver in the NFL. It's just all about landing spot. That's the thing with fantasy football. So many people talk up the landing spot where the player is, but in reality, you also have to bake in the fact that how high did you have Watson before the draft? Because if you didn't have him super high, then maybe there is a chance that the other player is able to surpass him. So interesting enough, something you did talk about though with Thornton that I just wanted to bring up real quick. Shout out to Nelson Aguilar. I don't know if any of you people watching this video ever remember that video where there's like a burning building and they have this in Philadelphia and they have to drop the kid out the building and the guy caught the baby and he's like, you want to know who wouldn't have done that? Nelson Aguilar. And that video is just implanted in my brain. That's one of the funniest videos ever. So shout out to that guy for saving the child.
A product of USC that might be wide receiver U. They continue to put up players, but any last words on these prospects? You're going to talk some Velus Jones. I don't have the heart to do it.
No, I don't even think it's worth talking about him. I mean, that guy is just as old as it gets. So
He's as old
you
as
really
me.
hate to see that.
He
It
was
really is.
when I was a senior in college, he was a sophomore, and I graduated in 2016, just for reference. Maybe he's a freshman. I don't know. But you get the point. But that'll do it for us today. These are our top 10 Dynasty receivers and the best of the rest. He is Nick Lepre at Notorious Fantasy. I'm Matt Gajewski. My Twitter handle is not on the screen, but it's at Matt_Gajewski. Check us out there. And thank you guys for watching. We'll be back with all sorts of Dynasty content this offseason, and we'll see you guys later.